What would you do if your own mother told 200 people you had vanished, when the truth was you had simply stopped paying her bills? For 4 years, my family called me a ghost. They lit candles for a daughter who was never lost. And when I finally stood in front of every person who believed her, I didn't raise my voice once. If stories about family, money, and the courage to finally say enough hit something in you, tap that like button right now, hit subscribe, and send this to the one person who needs to hear it today. It might be the reminder they've been waiting for. My name is Naomi Voss. I'm 33 years old. I work in the emergency room of a hospital in Denver, Colorado, and I have a 5-year-old daughter named Ren who thinks hospital scrubs are a costume I wear for fun. I live in a small yellow house with a porch swing I bought secondhand and fixed myself. For 4 years, nobody from my hometown in Nebraska knew that house existed. That wasn't an accident. It was a decision. And it started, of all places, with an envelope. I grew up in a town so small that everyone's business belonged to everyone. My father, Frank, drove a delivery truck. My mother, Linda, ran the hospitality committee at our church like it was a second full-time job. And in a lot of ways, it was the only job that ever truly earned her respect from the people around her. I have one younger sister, Callie, who is always the golden child in the easy, effortless way some siblings just are. I was the one who left. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I paid for nursing school with loans, grants, and every shift I could get at a diner 2 towns over. When I graduated, my mother threw a small dinner at our house. Meatloaf, a store-bought cake with my name written slightly crooked, and my diploma propped up against a vase like it was the guest of honor. For one evening, I was the pride of that kitchen. I would have done almost anything to keep feeling that way. My mother understood that better than I did. After dinner, she slid an envelope across the table, my name written on the front in her careful handwriting. I thought it was a card. It was empty. "For the house," she said, smiling like she was handing me a family heirloom. "You're the one who's going to be able to help now." Nobody at that table blinked. My father studied his coffee. Callie ate her cake. I laughed a little because I thought I understood the moment. One envelope, one favor, the least I could do for the woman who raised me. I filled it with money from my very first paycheck and mailed it back. The next month, another envelope showed up at my apartment. Then another. Nobody ever asked out loud again. The asking had already happened once, wrapped in pride and gratitude in front of witnesses. That envelope was never meant to be a one-time gift. It was a subscription I didn't know I'd signed up for, because the terms were written in a language I had been raised to call love. By the second year, we'd switched to bank transfers because stamps felt old-fashioned. Money left my account on the first of every month before the sun came up. Some months it was $800. In the bad months, it climbed past $1,500. And there was always a bad month coming. A furnace that needed replacing. My father's truck. A roof after a hailstorm that I paid for and felt proud of, like I was some kind of guardian keeping the rain off the people who raised me. On my side of the math, it looked different. Double shifts. Every holiday worked because holidays paid extra. Missed birthdays of my own friends because I was covering someone else's shift to cover my family's bills. My coworkers thought I was saving for a house of my own. I let them think that because the truth felt too strange to say out loud. I kept a small notebook where I wrote down every transfer, not because I ever expected the money back, but because numbers were the only thing in my family that never twisted into something else. Words in my house were slippery. Numbers held still. By year 5, the total in that notebook had 6 figures in it. I only said that number out loud once in my life, in front of 200 people, and I'll tell you exactly how that happened. But we're not there yet. Somewhere in the middle of all that giving, I met a man named David Ellery. He was a firefighter, 30 years old, with soot-stained boots and a laugh that filled a room. We met when he came into the ER after a minor injury on a call, and I bandaged his hand while he asked me, completely straight-faced, whether I thought his stitches would look cool enough to impress kids at the elementary school he visited for fire safety talks. I told him yes. I was right. He proposed a year later with no ring, just an old brass key on a leather cord, the key to a small fixer-upper house he'd put a down payment on. He said he wanted to give me a door, not a diamond, because doors were where real life happened. Ed. I brought him home to Nebraska exactly once. My mother asked about his salary before she asked his last name. She asked whether firefighters got good benefits. On the drive home, David said quietly, "Your mom really loves numbers." He had no idea how right he was. I didn't tell him because I hadn't let myself count it yet. That night, my phone lit up with a text from my mother, just for me. "He seems responsible, honey. Also, could you send a little extra this month? Don't mention it to your dad." I stared at that message for a long time. My engagement had a price of admission, and I paid it without complaint because that's what I always did. Everything changed on an ordinary Thursday. I had worked a 16-hour shift, come home, and slept through my alarm for what felt like the first time in my adult life. The transfer went out 3 days late. I remember thinking nobody would even notice. The phone rang at 7 the next morning. My mother didn't yell. If she had yelled, I could have fought back. Her voice was flat and cold, like a bill being read aloud. She said the mortgage payment had bounced. She said she'd had to explain it to my father and that it was humiliating. Then she said the sentence that has lived in my chest ever since. "You don't get to be tired, Naomi. You're the one who made it out." I stood in my kitchen in wrinkled scrubs and apologized twice. She accepted it once. I promised to set up an automatic transfer so it would never happen again, and she said that would be best. We hung up like a bank and a customer closing out a call. What shames me now isn't that she said it. People show you who they are for free, all the time. What shames me is that I spent the entire drive to work agreeing with her, already planning backup alarms, so I would never again be tired in a way that inconvenienced someone else. I was 29, apologizing for sleeping after a night spent keeping strangers alive. It would take something far bigger than exhaustion to make me put the phone down for good. Unfortunately, life had something bigger already on the way. It was a Tuesday in late autumn when the fire chief's office called me instead of David. A warehouse fire. A support beam that failed inspection reports had promised was safe. David Ellery, 31 years old, was gone before I even reached the hospital doors he had walked through so many times to visit me. I have comforted grieving strangers with more warmth than my own family showed at his funeral. His crew carried his casket in their dress uniforms, grown men crying openly. My parents called it a long drive and stayed home. They sent flowers with a card signed by my aunt, which told me everything about how much personal effort my mother had put into it. 4 days after the funeral, my mother texted to ask, gently, whether that month's transfer would still arrive on time given everything going on. I sent it. I'm not proud of that, but grief makes you obedient before it makes you anything else. 2 weeks later, I fainted at the nurse's station. A coworker walked me to a drugstore, and in a bathroom under fluorescent lighting, I found out I was 5 months pregnant. Night shifts had wrecked my body's signals for years, and I had blamed everything on stress. I sat there doing the math. I was 5 months from becoming someone's mother, and about to make one phone call that would decide whether I remained someone's daughter. I didn't know that second part yet. I planned that call the way I plan a medication chart, in order with no surprises. In the shower, I rehearsed it. "Mom, David died. Mom, I'm pregnant. Mom, my blood pressure is dangerously high and I have to stop sending money and start keeping every dollar for my daughter." Simple. True. But how do you hand someone a death, a birth, and a boundary in the right order? I got it wrong. I led with the boundary. She answered on the second ring and I said, "Mom, I need to stop sending money." That was as far as I got. The explosion on the other end of that line was instant. Ungrateful, she called me, after everything they had done. Then silence, followed by a dial tone as flat and final as a heart monitor with nothing left to say. I called back twice. Voicemail both times. I sat on my bathroom floor and let David's name, and the baby, and every word I never got to say fold themselves back into my chest like broken glass I couldn't spit out. That same week, my blood pressure landed me in front of a specialist who used the words preterm risk. He told me stress needed to disappear from my life immediately, like it was a medication I had to stop taking. So I tried my father last. I called him, heard his workshop radio playing behind his voice, and said, "Dad, please, something's happened." My father, a man who once drove 3 hours through snow for my school play, said quietly, "Don't upset your mother." Not, "Are you okay?" Not what happened. Every road into that family ran straight through my mow. Her, and she had closed it. I set the phone down and did not pick it back up for a long time. If you've ever been the one person in your family expected to give endlessly and forgiven for nothing, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know none of us were ever as alone in this as they made us feel. While I was learning what swollen ankles and blood pressure medication felt like, 700 miles away, my mother was quietly rewriting my story for anyone who would listen. It started small. My aunt posted something vague on social media about praying for a family going through a painful season. No names needed. Then, at church, someone asked where I'd gone. My mother, I was told, looked down, let a heavy silence sit in the room, and said, "We don't really know anymore." Every word of that sentence was technically true. She didn't know because she had hung up before knowing was even possible. Nobody corrected her, and a story that goes uncorrected in a small church becomes accepted history by the following spring. She never told an outright lie. She just declined again and again to tell the truth and let 200 kind, well-meaning people fill in the blanks with whatever made the most sense to them. In the only courtroom that ever truly mattered to her, the pews on Sunday morning, my absence became evidence, and I was convicted without ever being called to speak. I built my daughter's whole life in silence after that. I assembled a crib alone with an instructional video playing off my phone propped on a paint can. A coworker named Priya covered my hardest shifts before I even worked up the nerve to ask. The money that used to disappear on the first of every month became a car seat, a down payment on a small yellow house, and a cushion for the weeks I wouldn't be able to work. It felt strange watching my own money simply stay where I earned it. That's what years of guilt does to your sense of what's normal. In my 8th month, I wrote one letter by hand to my father's mother, Ruth. She was the one person in that family who had always preferred a hard truth over a smooth lie. I told her everything. David, the fire, the baby coming, the money, the phone call that ended it all. I gave her my new address in Colorado, the only person in Nebraska who had it, and asked for nothing except that she know the truth. Then I watched my mailbox for weeks. Nothing came. I told myself the letter got lost, because the other explanation, that she believed the story too, was too heavy to carry into labor. My daughter, Ren, arrived 3 weeks early on a cold morning in March, completely unbothered by any of the chaos that led up to her. The delivery went fast, and Priya stood in the room and held my hand through the hardest hour, narrating the whole thing like a sports commentator just to make me laugh. She cut the cord, because someone who loved us should be the one to do it. They placed 6 pounds of furious, dark-haired baby on my chest, and for the first time in 10 years of working in an emergency room, the nurse known for never crying finally did. Not from grief, from something that finally outweighed it. The 2 people who should have been pacing a waiting room with terrible coffee weren't there. One because he was gone, one because she had chosen not to be. We named her Ren, a name David had picked out one evening on the porch of the little house he never got to move into, trying names out loud like paint colors until one finally fit. 4 years passed like that, quiet, deliberate, and mine. My little yellow house got a garden. Ren learned to walk on our uneven porch steps. Priya became the kind of family you choose with your eyes wide open. Every December, I sent exactly 1 piece of mail north, a Christmas card to Ruth with a school photo tucked inside and my return address printed neatly in the corner. No demands, no explanation, just a thread I refused to let close completely, even if I never heard back. Somewhere in those quiet years, I stopped flinching every time my phone rang on the first of the month. I stopped rehearsing apologies to nobody. I learned, slowly, that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. It took me 30 years to learn the difference, and I intend for my daughter to learn it for free. I thought that peace was something I finally got to keep. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, somebody knocked on my front door. Before you find out who was standing there, let's pause for a second. If this story has you thinking about someone in your own life, someone who calls you generous instead of asking if you're okay, drop a comment with one word that describes them. I read every single one, and honestly, it helps me know this story is landing exactly where it needs to. To understand that knock, you need to know what had been happening in Nebraska while I was building a life nobody there could see. My grandmother Ruth had gotten sick that spring, hospitalized twice with pneumonia, now living with an oxygen tank and a very different relationship with how much time she had left. And Ruth, who had spent 4 years saying almost nothing, finally stopped staying quiet. At a Sunday dinner in front of everyone, she reportedly set down her fork and said she wasn't interested in dying inside a house full of unanswered questions. She wanted either me or a working phone number, and she wanted it soon. That single sentence changed everything because it forced my mother's hand. She no longer had the luxury of an absent daughter. She needed a reunion on her own terms with herself as the one who found me, the mother who never gave up hope. Within a week, my sister Callie, 26 now, was handed a slip of paper with my Colorado address written in our mother's tidy handwriting. She didn't ask where it came from. She told me later she should have. That detail matters more than she realized at the time. Callie drove 12 hours with the radio off. She knocked softly, almost apologetically, on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the door and watched 4 years hit my little sister right in the face. Before either of us said much, small feet came running down the hallway behind me. My daughter, dark-haired, with Ruth's eyes and my stubborn chin, skidded into view asking who was at the door. Callie made a sound like she'd been struck. Her eyes moved past Ren to the photo on my wall, David in his uniform, a faded ribbon still tied around the frame, and next to it, an old ultrasound picture in a small silver frame. She was doing the math the entire family had never let her see, and finishing it in real time on my porch. She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours that day and asked the one question nobody in my family had ever thought to ask before. How did he die? And then she actually listened to the answer. Before she left, she set a cream-colored envelope on my porch railing, careful, like it weighed more than paper should. Inside was a printed invitation to a church homecoming service, the words "All are welcome home" printed across the top in gold ink. "She wants you there," Callie said. "She says she's going to fix this." I asked how. Callie didn't know. I did. That night, my family found my number again, and a group chat I'd been quietly removed from years ago suddenly had my name back in it. At first, the messages felt almost human. She's alive. Is that really her house? Then, close to midnight, a new version of the story arrived, fully formed, the way you can always tell when a sermon has one true author even if she never typed a single word herself. She hid a baby from us for 4 years, her own mother. We deserve answers. Overnight, I went from the daughter who vanished to the daughter who deceived. Same audience, same verdict, new charge. Not one message asked about David. Not one asked how I survived carrying our daughter alone through the worst year of my life. Grief, apparently, had no value on that family's ledger, so it never made it onto the page. The next evening, my mother called me herself for the first time in nearly 4 years. I answered. I'm still not certain if I regret that. She cried before I even finished saying hello, real tears, the kind that are absolutely genuine and also perfectly timed. My baby had a baby, she kept repeating. I stood at my window watching Ren collect pine cones in the yard and let the whole emotional storm pass over me. Then my mother made her offer. Come to the homecoming service. Stand beside her. She would tell everyone I had simply been sick, dealing with a dangerous pregnancy, too overwhelmed to reach out. Nobody would ever need to know about the money. A sick daughter isn't a scandal, she said. It's a testimony. Notice everything that sentence quietly accomplished. It rewrote 4 years of silence into a redemption story with her standing at the center of it. It buried every dollar, every guilt trip, every ignored phone call, under a church carpet forever, with my signature required at the bottom. She wasn't offering me forgiveness. She was offering me a supporting role in a better produced version of her own lie. 2 nights later, an unfamiliar Nebraska number called my phone, and a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years said my name like it had never once been in doubt. It was Ruth. My sister had given her the number, the single most useful thing that slip of paper ever led to. Ruth told me she had received every single Christmas card, every school photo, and had kept every one of them somewhere safe. She told me exactly where when she told me what it meant. Her hands shook too badly to write back safely, she said, and any letter leaving that house got read at more checkpoints than she was comfortable with. Then her voice dropped into something steadier. People don't disappear, Naomi. They get erased, and I have watched who holds the eraser in this family for 40 years. I pressed my hand over my mouth so she woe. Uldn't hear what that did to me. I decided not to attend the big public homecoming performance my mother had planned. Instead, I drove to Nebraska quietly with Ren, stayed one night in a motel near Ruth's house, and spent an entire Saturday with my grandmother while she taught my daughter to thread a needle with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. During that visit, Ruth sent Ren to fetch her old sewing tin, and underneath spools of thread, I found every single Christmas card I had ever sent her, rubber banded together, edges soft from being read again and again. Ruth told me my mother had found that box the previous Christmas while looking for scissors, had gone through every card silently, and put them back exactly where they were without ever mentioning it to anyone. She had my address for 10 months while her entire church prayed over her missing daughter. She didn't need to find me. She needed me lost, because I was worth more to her that way. Word travels fast in a small town, and by the next morning the whole congregation somehow knew I was in Nebraska. My mother stood up during the actual homecoming service, took the microphone, and told 200 people that her lost daughter had come home, that God had brought her back, and that I would stand up soon to give thanks alongside her. I hadn't planned to attend at all, but sitting in that motel the night before, my daughter had asked me, half asleep, whether she had a grandmother. She'd met Ruth easily, but something in that question told me she'd been listening far more closely than I realized, and a gap had opened up that only I could close. I understood then that if I stayed silent, my silence wouldn't remain mine. My mother would fill it exactly like she'd filled the last 4 years, and someday my daughter would hear a version of her own mother that wasn't true. So the next morning, I put on a simple navy dress, let my daughter pick a bright yellow ribbon for her hair, tucked David's brass key into my pocket, not to show anyone, just to feel it there, and I walked into that church. The sanctuary was packed, folding chairs lining the walls, a hand-painted banner reading "Welcome Home" stretched over the doors. My mother stood at the pulpit in lavender, microphone in hand, thanking God for a season of sorrow that had finally turned to joy. She found me in the crowd, extended the microphone toward me like a peace offering, and said, "Naomi, honey, come up and give thanks with me." 200 faces turned at once. I stood up. I did not take the microphone. I told them, in a steady voice that carried just fine in a room built for hymns, that I had never disappeared. I had simply stopped paying, for 6 years, for a life I was never truly part of. I told them the exact number from my old notebook, more than $100,000, and I watched it land across that room like a stone dropped into still water. I told them that the year everyone called me missing, I had buried the man I loved and given birth to our daughter completely alone, and that not one single person in that family had ever asked if I was okay. Then I turned to my mother and gave her back, word for word, the sentence she had given me years earlier. "I was allowed to be tired, Mom, just never once around you." She lost her composure for the first time in years, right there in front of everyone who had only ever seen her graceful and grieving. I never raised my voice. In a room built for echoes, staying calm turned out to be the loudest thing I could have done. Not everyone in that church came around to my side that day, and I no longer expect them to. Some people will always prefer a comfortable story over an uncomfortable truth, and that's a loss I've learned to carry without it breaking me. But I walked my daughter up to meet her great-grandmother in front of the whole congregation, and I watched even the coldest faces in that room soften, just for a moment, because some things are simply bigger than a narrative built to protect one woman's pride. My mother caught up with me before I reached the door, and for the first time in years, she said something that wasn't performed for an audience. "Everything I did for this family," she said quietly, and I believed that she believed it. That's the saddest part of this entire story. I looked at her, my daughter on my hip, and I told her the truth as gently and as finally as I could. "Being needed is not the same as being loved, Mom. I hope someday somebody loves you without expecting anything back." Then I walked outside into a bright, cold morning, and I never looked back. My sister Callie found us in the parking lot before we left. She didn't defend our mother. She didn't make excuses. She simply asked if she could come visit her niece sometime, with nothing in her hands but herself. I told her Sundays worked, and to bring nothing at all. It was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years. These days, my grandmother Ruth visits every few months, teaching my daughter to sew with hands that shake for two very different reasons now. My mother sent one letter afterward, 3 pages long, full of everything except the word sorry. I read it once, put it in a drawer, and kept making dinner. It hurt less than I expected. That's the quiet miracle nobody tells you about. The wound doesn't disappear. It just eventually stops holding up the rest of your life. If you've ever paid for a place in your own family with money instead of love, I hope this story reminded you that you're allowed to stop. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to build a door of your own and decide exactly who gets to walk through it. If this story meant something to you, like it, subscribe for more, and send it to someone who still needs permission to put the envelope down for good.